It is the oldest ironies that are still the most satisfying. Man, when preparing for bloody war, will orate loudly and most eloquently in the name of peace. This is one of the many iconic lines in what it is considered the greatest graphic novel ever written. I'm talking about Watchmen by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. Let's get this book undone. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Livia J. Elliot, and today we have another guest talk. Today's spotlight is on Watchmen, a graphic novel written by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. Published in 1986, this work received the Hugo Award in 1988 in the Others Form category and the 1988 Locus Award for Best Nonfiction, when the Locus Award did not have a category for illustrated works. Later, the Time magazine placed it as one of the all-time 100 novels since 1923. With that said, allow me to introduce you to my guest for this discussion.
Hi, I'm Jared. I run the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel.
Hi, my name's Britton. I run Some Oak Dude. I was a longtime Alan Moore fan and aficionado.
Excellent. Now, before we get started, allow me to cover the usual disclaimers. First, there are spoilers in this podcast. Watchmen deserves a thorough discussion, and we will not hold back. Second, what you will hear is our subjective interpretation of this graphic novel. You may disagree with us, and that's completely fine. Now, one question for you all to start the discussion. If you have to pick one thing from Watchmen, whether it be themes, narrative style, visual style, a character, anything, what will you choose?
I find the core thematic question of Watchmen is Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons asking, well, what gives these people the right to dress up in costumes and go out to fight crime? That's what the title means. Who watches the Watchmen? You know, when these vigilantes are running around without any oversight, who keeps them accountable? And we kind of see throughout the story that why it's a bad idea to let people run around in costumes. Or at least Alan Moore shows the worst case scenario. I don't think he's entirely antagonistic to the idea of superheroes, at least at this point in his career.
Yeah, that's true. Something that I particularly like beyond the themes is how there is an echo between past and present all the time. It's what Dr. Manhattan says, that he experiences past and present at the same time. But I found it also presented through the graphic novel itself, like the panels will go from present to past, and you have different tones. You have both stories mixed in and no cue of when you jump into the past. I found that very interesting in the way he actually had this character presenting that a temporality while at the same time writing the novel in a way that make you experience that as if everything was happening at the same time. I found that amazing.
I would pick visual narrative structure as my thing for this particular work, especially. It has an extreme strength of visual structure to it that can't be replicated. People have tried to replicate it in adaptations, but it does not work the same. You can tell the story in an adaptation, but you can't replicate this visual structure that this book uses so well, and I really love it.
It's almost a 101 of what you can do in comics, really, just in one book.
That's true. Every aspect is incredibly well tailored, from the characters, the story, the visuals, the colors. Everything has a message. Something that I really loved along those lines was how many stories are weaved in here. We have at least 5 different stories. It starts with the prior mask heroes and the current ones. And then we have the murder story. The threads keep weaving until we have the past of every character, what happened currently, what is happening now. I found that incredible. And I loved when you have the alternating scenes in a different color. So you have the stories presented in different colors, in different shapes as well, with different highlights. Like you said, Gerald, the visual aspect is amazing, honestly.
Yeah, you have many layers of story on a single page that come through when you take a good look at the panel structure. And specifically, Gibbons uses the 9 panel structure, which was kind of a throwback at the time as comics were moving more, leading from one panel to the next, the action oriented stuff that was becoming more prevalent during in the 80s, especially in the superhero comics. Gibbons takes the one of the classic 9 panel formats and he uses that to structure the story with many different layers and levels going through the panels. It really is beautiful once you understand what he's actually doing with the artwork in these panels. It's something to behold.
That's true. It has like a very structured setup. Modern comics, sometimes the panels have a different structure, and in here it's always 3 by 3. And at the most, you have like one big panel, but that's it.
Yeah, but they use rare, and because of that, it's to actually greater effect in their use. There's a purpose to them. Yeah.
Yeah, I personally don't really like the term graphic novel. I think I prefer the term comics, but I find if there ever was I've heard this be said before, so I didn't originate this, but if there is a book, I think that lives up to the name of a graphic novel, it's this book because just the way it's structured, from the storytelling to the themes to the character, it really feels like a novel that just happened to be illustrated, not just more. I think Gibbons deserves a lot of the credit too. He tends to get kind of overlooked. Just the fact that he was able to put down all that Moore wrote down, because Moore is known for having these very dense, detailed scripts, and Gibbons and Higgs, the colorist, they met him. They really did. And I'm really sad they never worked together again because Alan Moore kind of had a falling out with DC and, well, superhero comics in general. Yeah, it's truly magnificent. I made a video recently about books that consumed me, and Watchmen is definitely one of them because it just, again, just the detail that's put into it. It's a book I go back to again and again. I discover something new.
On that, I want to go back to what you said originally, Briton, because that's a theme that goes from the very beginning. And at first, it appears like graffitis in the walls with the phrase, "Who watches the Watchmen?" And that's a reference to the number of masked vigilantes that took over the streets, to the two generations that we have here. I think it also references how the laws were tweaked to accommodate them. Between the first generation and the second generation of masked vigilantes, we have a commentary that for the first one, some rules or some laws were tweaked so that they were allowed to continue. So, what do you think the novel discusses about unchecked power, both political and personal?
Well, I think the question is explored with the characters of Rorschach and Ozymandias. Rorschach obviously is this very unhinged, paranoid loner who goes out and beats up people who he doesn't even know if they're criminals or not. I mean, Rorschach's actually my favorite character of the story, which I know is kind of a, I guess, a problematic thing to say nowadays, and Moore would probably like roll his eyes at me. But it's hard not to feel pity for him once you kind of learn his story. But also, on some level, in his deluded way, he is trying to do the right thing. And also with that, you kind of see Moore ask the question like, okay, is this the price you're willing to pay to create a better world? Same thing with Ozymandias, who's this very charismatic, who's the opposite of Rorschach in a lot of ways. Charismatic, rich, driven, handsome, but he also sets the whole thing in motion. And at the end of the story, Moore asks, okay, is this what you're willing to put up with to create a better world? And also, who's watching over these people? Make sure they're not doing anything that insane.
Actually, my favorite two were those two, Rorschach and Ozymandias. I thought that they had, first of all, incredibly nuanced personalities, but also the way they are purely morally gray. It's not just let's kill this many to say that many. I think it's very elaborate what they do. As you said, Rorschach has a very traumatic past, and he feels above the law simply because the law failed him, or rather than saying that he feels above it, it's more like he feels he has to do what the law and the policemen don't do.
It's like he says in his chapter, we don't do this because we want to, we do it because we are compelled.
We have to. Yeah. I found that his final line of never submit or never surrenders, I found that incredible because it's a very twisted character. Yes, he kills a lot of people, but then there is a scene in which he's incarcerated because he killed a serial attacker that was attacking women, right? The novel is always A but B, you always have both sides of the coin and it's showing them in a very interesting way. With Ozymandias, the thing that he puts in motion, it ends up working. And I think that's the absurdity of it. What will it take for humanity to stop warring itself to have something bigger to war?
It's interesting that you guys brought up what set this in motion, but what actually sets all this in motion is the comedian himself, because it's because of what the comedian points out to the gathering of all the heroes that both Rorschach and Ozymandias have a little change in perspective. They come out of that meeting with a new kind of look at what they're doing, especially Rorschach. He actually changes as a person quite a bit from what he was doing before that meeting, where he was a little bit more straight laced of a vigilante, and he gets a lot more harsh and a lot more violent with his activities after listening to what the comedian said about how much of a joke it all is and what the comedian had to do Vietnam and stuff like that. And then Ozymandias doesn't put his plan into motion until after he also gets exposed to what the comedian said about everything that was going on. When the comedian burns that plan, that also burns any idealistic viewpoints that these characters had upon the idea of superheroes helping society, because the comedian pointed out it was a joke.
It's kind of funny you mentioned that because I was talking with a friend of mine about this a while back, and he actually pointed out to me that really, if you think about it, the comedian is the true villain of the story. He foresaw Dr. Manhattan's drifting away from regular people because, what he became. He gave Ozymandias the idea to do what he did. He tried to rape Sally and is also her dad. That kind of lends to one of my problems with Watchmen. I don't think it's a perfect story, though it is very close. It's interesting because, like, technically Ozymandias is the main antagonist, but really, if you think about it, it is a comedian. Because if he wasn't such a nihilistic jerk, things could have been different. If he had simply been like, you know what, let's hope for a better world. Let's try to do the right thing. Maybe things could have been different. But that's not the story Moore and Gibbons wanted to tell.
Well, also you could look at it like comedian warned them about what was happening politically. And he said, this is what's going to happen. You look at what he warned them about, and he warned them about Nixon abolishing the 2-term limit on the presidency. And he warned them about the ramifications of what Dr. Manhattan actually represents. And so I think Moore does away with pure villains and heroes in this story. The comedian does a lot of horrible things, but he also was warning people about what's to come, and nobody was listening to him. And so I think you have to look at that on all levels with all these characters. They all have their huge flaws, and his are most prominent. It pointed out specifically because he is such a jerk. His faults are emphasized in order to really throw everything off the trail about what everybody else is doing. I think it's beautifully executed.
I loved what you say there that he does away with heroes and villains. I think that's true. Like all the characters have some redeeming qualities and some awful flaws. That's an incredible depiction of humanity itself. Like none of us are just purely perfect or purely flawed. With all his problems, it seems that the comedian started differently as well, that he started like perhaps more idealistic when he was on the first generation of vigilantes with the Minutemen, and then he was corrupted. Like there are some implications that could happen, just like what he did to the others, to Rorschach and Ozymandias. He came back with just the truth that they weren't prepared to see, and that basically changed everything. But then the question is, what happened to him to change? What moral impact was there? And that was perhaps the disbandment of the first group of vigilantes and how that happened, which is also what Britton referenced. It's like all of them are always affecting each other, either directly or indirectly, as it happens in real life. And I thought that was part of the complexity of the character working here.
Yeah, and I think the alternate history that Moore and Gibbons creates, hate to say it, frighteningly plausible. or bizarrely plausible. Maybe that's probably a better word. There's a couple things I'm like, that's a little silly, but also superhero comics are kind of silly in general. So
In terms of the alternate history, they make a comment such as Europe is still warring or they are recovering in the past timeline when they are talking about the Minutemen. And in US, we have people running out in trunks and stuff and pretending to be vigilantes. It's like the contrast. And I think he was also trying to make a cultural commentary.
came to some pretty scathing indictments about America in this book.
Not unjustified in some cases, and Moore is an aficionado of the American experience. He also explored this in his Swamp Thing series as well. But I think here he's definitely exploring more of the imperialistic aspects of the United States, especially when it was related to the Vietnam experience. And he was also exploring the whole mutual annihilation scenario with Russia, with the Soviet Union and the United States, and how the existence of a Dr. Manhattan, of course, throws that all out of whack. And the erasing of Dr. Manhattan from the equation sets into motion that instant impulse to break out and assume a new dominance by one side or the other, which, of course, in the book here, it leads to Russia invading Afghanistan and moving on from there. And it just escalates from that point. But when you had that nuclear deterrence between the U.S. and the Soviet Union prior to Dr. Manhattan, there was this balance of powers. And then Dr. Manhattan upset the balance. And that balance was so upset to one side that when Manhattan was gone, the spring broke, the floodgates opened as far as what was going to happen next on the planet. And that's, of course, Ozymandias' justification for everything that he does.
I was reading the whole part, trying to understand what was Manhattan's role in all of this. I came up with this, like if you look at it like historians do, like the causes of war are fear, honor, and interest. He was, as you said, the ultimate fear, the ultimate deterrence, because there was nothing to do about him. He could basically wheel them out. So the equilibrium he brought up was basically enforced. He was the only thing maintaining the equilibrium. There wasn't like a socio-political or geopolitical structure supporting that peace. Both sides still wanted to destroy each other. And the moment he's gone, the moment that source of fear is gone, right? The only thing that you have is the interest on one side to take over and destroy the other. So war ensues. I thought that it may have been also perhaps a twist into how the nuclear stalemate and the mutually assured destruction ended up in the 70s. To my understanding, he was trying to just play with the idea of what happens if we remove the factor that prevents the mutually assured destruction. What happens if we no longer have that deterrence, and if we don't have the social or economical, structure to prevent war otherwise?
And the existence of Dr. Manhattan, of course, made it one-sided to keep things in check. It was one-sided because he was under control, at least the apparent control of the United States government. And that one-sidedness makes the Soviet Union, they have a feeling of inferiority because they can't match up to what the United States has in their arsenal. It's interesting that the United States in this story under Nixon, under a president who abolishes this two-term limit and keeps in power because of unprecedented happenings with the advent of Dr. Manhattan. It's interesting that one of the character flaws of Manhattan is his lack of imagination, that he actually has to follow what these guys, he doesn't come to that character growth point till much later in the story, where he finally was like, oh, I'm just going to go to Mars and make something. And he had to be manipulated into that. It wasn't even an idea that he had on his own. He had to be manipulated into that by Ozymandias and his plans. And his lack of imagination kept this United States being in power all these years in place. Could have just done that right away if he had more imagination and used it in such a manner.
He was also a bit sad, his character. He was just so factual that he literally had lost all humanity. And I think that you nailed why, because he didn't have imagination or the ability to abstract himself either.
I think with Dr. Manhattan, you really see more playing with the concept he likes to play in a lot of his work, particularly superhero, which is like the superhero as a god. Because, basically, Dr. Manhattan is like a god figure. You can't do anything to him, can't beat him. I mean, the only thing you can do is kind of what Ozymandias does, is just do the plot right under his nose because he doesn't really care. He's doing his own thing over in Mars.
He didn't even have like a kryptonite.
Yeah, no. There's also that theme of loss of humanity that Moore plays with, and we kind of talked about a little bit in V for Vendetta, and he also plays with Ozymandias and Rorschach, because on some other level, they're also just divorced from the rest of humanity, rather it be because of Ozymandias's, heightened intelligence, and, he's the smartest man alive, and with Rorschach, he's not stable. We'll just say that.
To me, I think intelligence is also highly related to the ability to innovate. And as Jarrell said, he had no imagination, he had no ability to think out of a box. He just thought what was there, and that's it. He was lacking all of the other bits that make up for intelligence. He just knew the theory. That's it, all the theory. And I think that's exactly why Ozymandias' ploy actually works, because he plays on the last bit of humanity he had, which was his care for his first girlfriend from the other people and the fear that he may have done the same to his current girlfriend. But after that, he's just like, meh, okay, I'm not human anymore. That's it. He learned the lesson, and that's it. He lost that single link to humanity.
Yeah, also like the subtle detail, like he loses more clothing as he kind of goes more into, oh, I'm a god now, basically.
Yeah. I thought that as a reference of he's losing his shame for who he was, because at the start it seems that he was still trying to fit in after the accident. When he reconstructs himself, he is shown in a few times fully clothed in a very human way. As he loses his humanity, as he loses his desire to fit in and be just like the rest, as he comes to accept himself, he keeps losing clothes.
Yeah, and we also kind of see, kind of cutting back to the theme of like what gives these people the right to go out and beat up criminals. You kind of see the same thing with Rorschach, almost homeless, crazy guy who's running around beating up people and killing them because he thinks that evil should be punished, even though he, kind of cuts back on that all the time. And then there's also Ozymandias, who's basically pulling off this other plan and no one's telling him what to do. He's basically just going on his own volition. And it's like, well, I think that cuts to another theme, which is like, what's the point of being a superhero if there's no consideration for humanity? And Moore plays with that as well, especially in stuff like Miracle Man, which was like his first big work on superheroes. And the question is, it would not be good.
That's true. Moore plays with these concepts. The problem of superheroes in a society, because it doesn't add up. You couldn't have a Spider-Man, like the Spider-Man comic. You couldn't have that in actual society. That's a fantasy. That's something that goes beyond what would actually happen in reality, because any kind of thing that happens like that is going to be surrounded by so much cause and effect that this idea of a superhero on that level would be just blown up and exposed in so many different ways, because of the way that society needs to have these things explained and have these things brought out into the open and have them dissected in the news, and especially governments, people in power. They would all be all over this stuff, and there wouldn't be this casual attitude towards, oh, somebody stopped a robbery on Fifth Street, in an amazing way. That's wonderful. That actually wouldn't happen. And so Moore takes that concept and he tears it down. He deconstructs it. He tears it apart. Gives us a story that builds on the fears of not only what unchecked power can have, but also even power that is given some limited ability to operate would eventually fall apart under the very structures of the society in place.
Yeah, like he's doing a thorough political critique, because this is published by DC. But something else that I found was he had like some echoes of the characters. For example, Night Owl, not the one from the Minutemen, the current one, the one dressed like the owl. He could very well be a play on Batman. He's a rich guy. He has a lot of gadgets. He has like a flying thing. He has some cars. Like it's pretty similar, even his costume. But at the same time, he had to do a lot of things to avoid his fortune and everything being questioned and being affected. He did not reveal his identity, so there are a few things in there that he had to do to avoid the whole debacle that was happening. And following what you said, Jarrell, something thing that I found very interesting is that generally society doesn't change until it's ready, right? You have political decay before that. In the superheroes styles or comics, you just have that decay and you have the interference of the superhero and suddenly everything is fine. That's a balancing force. And in here, that doesn't happen. Society tolerates them for a bit, but then it starts questioning them as the morals get complex. They repel them, the laws change again, and mask vigilantes are forbidden. But then after crimes get worse, nobody cares, society moves on. you know, it's as you said, like there is a critique in there. I thought it was very subtle, but to me, it said it's not about a bunch of guys or women running in their underwear with a cloak. Social improvement is not about just them. It's a work for the whole of society. And that's what Ozymandias' plot works, because he somehow forces everyone to be involved. Every country, every politician, every person has to care, because it just goes beyond what humanity is understanding at that moment or used to at that moment.
There is, like Jared said earlier, that critique of imperialism. We kind of see that a lot with the comedian because he's less of a superhero and he more just becomes like a black ops agent for America, basically. Kind of like a more like cynical Captain America, which in a way. There's a panel I just find hilarious, and it's Dr. Manhattan being like, oh, he rescued these hostages from Iran, and it's him just like flexing his muscles. And there's these people just getting off the plane, and they're utterly just like, oh my God, let's get the hell out of here. I'll have to find it. But it's really, I think it's in the Dr. Manhattan issue, and it's just like, oh my good Lord.
I have another question for you, and we touched in a bit on the characters, but I want to go back to them. Perhaps discuss a bit more of morality as it is presented in the graphic novel, because I think there is a lot in there. But for example, Rorschach moral code is quite rigid. To him, it's just good and evil, and that's it. There is a clear delineation. Dr. Manhattan, basically, he seems to think everything is too abstract. Morality, good or bad, is abstract, non factual. He doesn't care. That's it. But there are others that, for example, Ozymandias, he's pragmatic. We could say that even utilitarian in some way, but he's also relativist because he's acting based on what he sees all the time. What's happening, he reacts to that and craft or adjust his plans to that. So, based how the characters are presented, we have first the whole crew presented, and then the chapters that go in depth into each of the characters and give us their background, right? I think that the novel puts a lot of effort on not siding with any character. They all have their dirty laundry put up there, and they all have their good deeds also put up there. And it's always up to the reader to decide. So, my question for you is, given the way it's presented, given what we know of the characters and what happens in the plot, do you think that moral clarity is possible, or that the compromise is inevitable?
Well, I think that all boils down to the Rorschach test that we see throughout the whole book here. Rorschach's mask is black and white, and that reflects his moralistic views. Everything's black and white.
It's also ironic because the Rorschach test is a test in subjectivity.
But the whole book, when it looks at morality, is a Rorschach test on morality. What do you see in the image? What do you see in the images in this book? What do you see in these characters? You could probably say a lot of people would look at Dan the Night Owl as a good guy.
Well, he's not really like evil. He's just kind of a sad sack.
Right. But as you go through the book, is he always doing the right thing? Probably not. There's probably flaws in there somewhere along the way. But that's part of the thing. More is trying to just have a deeper look. Like the concepts of good and evil, when you look at Dr. Manhattan, they don't exist. Those are concepts that humans made up. So Manhattan's not going to recognize them. And so Ozymandias is also thinking not in the terms of good and evil. He's thinking in the terms of, I need to sacrifice this in order to make this place a better place to live. And so he's trying to do away with these moral constructs that humans have created in order to evolve and survive as a society. Whereas Dan, the Night Owl, and some of the other people, Laurie and so forth, they have more emotive as far as what their feelings are. and they go on emotion and they feel bad when they stay more empathetic to people they see who are suffering and stuff like that. And so their moral relativity is going to be more based upon what they're feeling in the moment of what they see. And so Moore is playing with that with all these characters. You have the comedian, he's laughing at all the moral choices that people make because he's seeing it as a big joke. He's seeing it as, I can do what I want because I'm given the power to do so. These people are giving me these power. Who am I to make these moral judgments when the people in power are the ones who's supposed to be in charge of that? And so the comedian goes off and does away with morality in a lot of cases. And he comes back at times towards the end, especially when he sees his effect on people like his daughter. Eventually, there's a lot of exploration of that, and that's part of the Rorschach test. It's part of the blending of what people see on that piece of paper.
There's a lot of like irony that's played in this narrative. He plays a lot with irony. I mean, Rorschach being like super rigid in his morality, but the Rorschach test is test of subjectivity. The comedian's probably the most like rampantly, unrepentantly amoral character in the story, but then he sees something that even he can't just go like, oh, it's a joke. Believe it or not, he realizes the world was even darker than he could have imagined.
I like something that Jarrell mentioned about society or expecting the ruling class or the politicians to basically outline morality and legality as well. And I think that the novel tries to make a hard point that there are things that we can't delegate. That's why we also have society showing up as rebelling or changing or having opinion. I found the guy on the magazine stall, the one that's going throughout the whole story, like he has a lot of opinions. Whenever he appears, he's complaining about this, about that, that whatever happened, the laws that changed, anything. He does nothing about it. What he only does is about complaining, getting the newspaper and selling the newspaper, no action. I think that's also a reflection of what they are trying to say thematically in here. It's like if we want something to change, or if we want legality or laws to somehow outline what's moral and what's not, society has to request a change. So, and that's also why the regulations that were put in place to allow the minutiae, that first generation of vigilantes to work in, were then replaced because society spoke up finally. But then that doesn't happen, and so everyone is allowed to still do whatever they want. And that's a question, isn't it? Is it moral because it is or not, or is it moral whether when we speak up for or against it?
You can also see all those little tiny hints and threads in almost every page and panel in this book. And those questions come up all the time, even in the most innocuous stuff that you can imagine. Like the second issue, page 2, you have Laurie visiting her mother, wherever her mother's living there, the rest resort. It's that classic 9-panel layout. And the panels go in an X, are lit up very nicely, whereas the other 4 panels are dark because they're showing the funeral of the comedian. I love the whole setup in that page because you have Laurie talking to her mother and she's lighting a cigarette in the third panel on that page, right? And the mother is walking around, opening doors and windows. She's talking completely about something else. She's talking about the weather and how sunny it is, and it's a beautiful day. She's talking about forgetting about the past, which is really important, right? Because it deals with the comedian, of course. She's talking about being healthy and the vitamins, and that's really important that she's talking about vitamins and healthiness because that relates directly to what the cancer that Dr. Manhattan is supposedly causing all these other people, right? And what do we relate cancer with? We relate it to smoking, and especially in the 80s, that was a big thing. We see in the middle panel that Laurie's little smoke is coming up from the cigarette right in front of her mother, the back of her mother there. So there's all these little signifiers in the drawings and stuff like that. And then we have to the final thing, and she says, "Oh, you got to take care of yourself. Your old buddies have passed on." So her mother mentions death, and Laurie's like, "Fine, I'll put the damn cigarette out." It's just that little subtle passive aggressive stuff that her mother's doing throughout that whole little interaction. It brings up all the little things, the details in life that relate to bigger themes. The smoking, the bigger societal implication of that, the need to face the past and talk about it and deal with it and overcome some of the things that happened in the past. That past is reflected in the funeral of the comedian because the comedian is the instigator of those things in the past. And so those panels just mix so well, and it seems so like just a side thing to the main story, but it's really not when you really look into it.
Following that scene after the funeral, in the next page, I think it's the third page of the chapter, we still have the very illuminated panels. It's interesting because Sally picks up the photo and the photo looks a bit darker. Immediately, we get one panel that's completely white out because it's representing the flash of the camera, and we go back to the past. And the only difference is that if you look at the scenes in the past, like the floor is a very deep blue, the walls are a very deep brown. When they were in the present, we have like the sun, yellowish, golden streaks coming in through the window, like everything was illuminated. And then suddenly we move into the past and we get the scene about what happened between the comedian and Sally, which basically echoes all the darkish colors that are there. Besides all the little details of how they keep moving and doing things, and the conversation keeps weaving between the mother and the daughter, we also have like a cue about what we are going to witness, because the actual events in the past doesn't happen until you flip the page, right? So you have like a whole page of introductory darkness, and suddenly we have everything afterwards. Something that I found interesting in that passage is that it doesn't mean that previous times were in general darker for the story, because that was a point in which they were setting up the first batch of vigilantes. The laws hadn't been changed yet, but they had all found out a need to act because things were going. If I recall correctly, that past scene is basically in the aftermath of World War II. So we also have all the consequences that brought to the US as well.
Yeah. And even on that same page, you also get in the darker panels at the funeral, you get the introduction of, we didn't know at the time, but it's Rorschach holding the sign. The end is nigh, so you get that little visual of things to come because the end really is nigh. And
The
stuff.
detail on the first page, you actually see Rorschach walking
Yeah.
when he's writing his you see, but it's not him in
Yeah.
his suit.
Yep. It's Kovacs. Yeah. And
It's just regular Walter Kovacs.
it's just brilliant. Just so many hints in that one page that relate to so many things. And he does that throughout the whole book. It's just great.
How he uses color to bias the readers, I found that amazing. We can have different opinions about different scenes, but he's always using the tones like red for something very violent, or bright yellow, or things like that, and then darker, subdued, cooler tones for things that where something is about to happen, which it's pretty interesting because at the end we have the whole snow scene, which is pretty white, but still he uses like very few tones. And what I liked on this one is that he's using like yellow only for the place where Ozymandias is, kind of like hinting at we are going to enter a different realm and therefore a different moral view of what's happening.
I really love how I guess I should say Gibbons uses perspective in this. It's funny Jared mentioned Spider-Man earlier because the co-creator of Spider-Man, Steve Ditko, was actually an inspiration to both Moore and Gibbons. Point I was trying to get to is I really like how he uses like perspective. Like there's a lot of really great like visual storytelling of just the characters just kind of walking around. You see this with Rorschach, kind of this scene right here at the very beginning. I really love that. Or also the scenes where Rorschach, and it's his perspective. It's like seeing it through his eyes. It's like they can't see me. And he like observes Dan and Laurie just kind of hanging out. I just really love that. I think the 9 panel grid actually was stolen from Ditko, if I remember right. Probably where it was taken from, but I could be wrong.
It was a common comic book throughout the 50s and 60s. It was a very common method. Yeah.
I want to go back to the morality and something that we haven't touched yet, which is that structure we have in the whole comic. At the start, we begin with interweaving a story of the Minutemen and the aftermath of the second batch of vigilantes. But after that, we basically dive into every character's story. Every chapter is someone's background, and we get basically everything that happens. So I think that Watchmen was trying to suggest that morality is shaped by the stories that we tell ourselves, the interpretation of the events, because every character had beliefs, had opinions, had background stories and skeletons, we could say, that shaped their view of society and what's happening, and also shaped their view of what they had to do, of the duty they felt. Case in point, Rorschach, he does everything he does because he feels he's attached to it because of what happened when he was young. How does that reflect on our cultural narratives about good guys and villains? Does morality depend on who tells the story, or can there be a universal code that everybody is aligned on?
That kind of brings up opinions on morality. I mean, I don't think morality is something that's like thought up in the ether. I do think there is something that is above us, because it's kind of what Moore plays with here. It's like, well, was Ozymandias right to drop a psychic squid on New York? I mean, I don't think so, but it worked.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty deep philosophical question there. Do the ends justify the means?
Now, if you're Rorschach, no, it doesn't. Evil must be punished as far as Rorschach is concerned.
And Rorschach is also quite morally gray because the people he kills are people that everybody will agree are evil or criminals with a track record.
But are they? That one guy in the bar who just insults him, and then Rorschach just walks up and breaks his pinky.
Not that one, but for example, the guy he drops in front of the police station, and then you have a few other criminals he actually kills. And those criminals hadn't been actually chased by the police or had been let go. When I was reading, I thought that the book was trying to say that goodness is chronically morally gray.
Well, I mean, I think with Rorschach, it's kind of more throwing in that kind of very unbending vigilante that you might find in like Batman, or well, The Question, which is what Rorschach was more based on, is basically asking, does that really work in a world like this where it's just like even the superheroes don't know what the hell to do? That's the whole point of the book. It's kind of like what Jared said earlier. It's like a Rorschach test, which I never thought of it like that before. You're real smart, Jared. That's good insight.
You can just look at the cover of the book itself. That smiley button, that yellow represents sunshine and it represents goodness and what everybody likes. And then you have this big splat on the sunshine. And what does that splat mean? Does that mean our sunshine's ruined? Does it mean that we have to clean something up? Or does it mean that it's not really what it actually seems to be? Can you ruin sunshine just with a little blotch like that? Doesn't mean it can be fixed. That's also the first panel in the whole book, is that button on the sidewalk there, surrounded by blood and surrounded, and having that blotch on it. It's the piece that Rorschach brings to Dan. He throws it down in front of him, representing, hey, we have something to fix here. We have something to look into. We have something that's ruining what we think is good. That's another Rorschach test, right? The cover itself. When it comes to Rorschach himself, there's so much wrong with him. But the thing is, we get the explanations of what's wrong with him. We get a deep dive into what made Rorschach throughout the book here. And thus we get compassion at some points for him, and we get understanding of where he's coming from. Doesn't mean what he does is correct. But I think Moore is trying to tell us that compassion and understanding are very important to human nature and very important to being human, whether or not. And we need to figure out ways to deal with society as it is.
I think Rorschach is more misguided than evil. Moore has kind of gone in record going like, look, I think Rorschach's a bad guy and whatever. And yes, I think what he does, he approaches it the wrong way. I don't think it's a particularly great idea to just walk out there and kill people you think are criminals. But like, I think there are points, especially during his chapter, at least for me anyway, where it was really hard like not to at least empathize with where he's coming from. Because, you can tell, despite the whole rhetoric he tells himself about whores and politicians will cry save us, and I'll say no, he does care. And I think that's what this story is about. It's about these 5 people trying to figure out what's best for the world. Even they don't know. And that's kind of the whole question. It's like, well, if these superheroes, these like godlike figures don't know what the hell is going on, well, what are we going to do? It might be a bit pessimistic, but it is a good question to ponder.
Everything he does has that type of question, and how to say it, about the stories that we tell ourselves and how that influences what we or how we interpret society, and what's the opinion of society about the current facts. Like in the opening panels, right? Once we zoom out and see the smiley, It turns out that there is a lot of blood in the street, and there is a guy cleaning it up as if nothing happened. He's even annoyed that Rorschach is passing through it. And suddenly, in the next 2 pages, we found out that's human blood. That's actually the comedian's remains that are being washed out. And the guy cleaning it, he just wants to clean up the walkway and move on with his business. It's almost saying like we are also a problem. We complain all the time that we want to have goodness or regulations or that we are moral, but then this guy shows somebody die there and doesn't even care. He's just cleaning.
That reflects, I think you mentioned earlier, Livia, the newspaper guy. The whole book, he's complaining about stuff.
He's annoyed at this kid for reading this pirate comic. Why are you wasting your time reading that?
Yeah, he's annoyed at the kid. He wants to make sales, but he's also complaining about what he reads in the paper. And he doesn't do anything to fix any of that. He doesn't take any actions to correct what he's complaining about, almost as if he enjoys that complaining. By the very end of the book, what does he do? He ends up hugging the kid. The kid was reading the comics. He ends up wanting to feel human in those last moments with the kid there. And I think that's part of all of that. But everybody has their moments. Everybody has their need of being human and human contact and feeling the compassion at some point.
Something that I loved about that scene, which is also pretty cruel, as you mentioned, and the motif on hugs, is that before the psychic explodes, we have a few fights going on because the magazine seller, he's basically insulting the boy. And they are like, again, why are you reading all of this? And in the background, we have the taxi driver and her girlfriend both fighting. And we have the psychologist fighting with his wife, and both of them trying to stop the taxi driver. We also have two policemen getting out of a cab. It's like we have all this conflict in the background that we don't pay attention because they are literally drawn in the background of the panel. And in the foreground, we have the newspaper guy complaining about the boy reading. But at the end, all of those petty conflicts don't matter. And that's why he hugs the boy, because at the end of the day, we are just humans and all of those differences didn't matter. They were just created by us.
It's like Dr. Manhattan's epiphany a bit earlier when he's like, "Oh, your dad and your mom got together despite all this horrible history. Well, you know what? I guess humanity's worth it. Let's go." And that's not exactly what he says. It's a very bad paraphrasing of what Dr. Manhattan says, but it does kind of remind me of that a little.
But all those little conflicts you see in the street in the background there, what is also happening? Little conflicts, bigger conflicts all across the world. And what also stops when that squid hits New York? All the conflicts across the world. The same way those little conflicts are stopped. So that it's they're all there for a purpose. It's really brilliant.
I think it also speaks about human nature, especially what we discussed when we did like 2 years ago the discussion on the Joyce. Like conflict seems to be human nature. And in here, I think Alan Moore is just showing that over and over, like in every scene, or there are even when people are somewhat at peace. There are always conflicts that may be made up conflicts about opinions and silly things. And, it's like we are always trying to find out a way to fight each other. And it's not only sad, but I also think it's contradictory, especially because always trying to do the right thing, to have good laws and everything, but then we pick up conflicts, silly conflicts everywhere.
Sometimes those little conflicts allow us to grow and allow us to be a better person eventually. And so, where is the balance of the conflicts that are happening on the page in here? Like the psychiatrist who was treating Rorschach, that's his job. It was to figure out the conflict within a person and try to treat it and try to deal with it and make it better. He ultimately, of course, he fails with Rorschach, and that brings out a big conflict within himself, within his own life, with his wife and everything else. And these conflicts are, like you said, a part of human nature. It's not just only a bad thing. It can also be something that allows people to grow as well. It's conflict resolution that is the ultimate end of this book, because the advent of what Ozymandias did is a trigger for conflict resolution with the nations of the world, just as there's been a bunch of triggers throughout the book for conflict resolution with the characters. Think of Sally Jupiter, and she wants that conflict resolved with the comedian. She doesn't want to have it hanging over her head her whole life. She wants to move on for that. Her daughter doesn't want to move on from that. You have that balance of conflict and conflict resolution. That
Yeah, I kind of empathize with Laurie there. I'm kind of like, I don't get it. Like, Why? And it's never really explained.
It's pretty twisted. Yeah, no. The ending in that, for that thread of a plot, that ending was a bit shocking, you know? And but I wanted to go back to something that Jarrell mentioned, like the psychologist treating Rorschach, the scene with the dogs, basically. So the doctor keeps showing Rorschach some Rorschach test, and he keeps saying butterflies or something very happy until he actually says, "I see a dog with a head split." And then he goes on to tell the whole story, pretty crude, basically. Girl disappeared, someone fed her to the dogs, and then Rorschach took matters to hand. And that,
Yeah, it's what broke him.
yeah, and but that's also what breaks a psychologist, because after that, he's just completely shocked, because it's like he was always so positive up to there. But that's the moment he goes and said, like, damn, humanity's twisted. And then his wife tries to make him leave the work where it is and have a clear split between work and life. And I think that some things affect us in such a profound manner that changes who we are. And the psychologist at that point was going through that. He couldn't uphold his normal optimism because of what he had been told, because it also challenged his view on morality. Who was wrong in there? Was Rorschach actually wrong for doing what he did when police was doing nothing? And then when the other couple they were having dinner asked him, he just says everything. The couple just leave. It was socially awkward, and it makes sense because I may have seen like there is a marriage problem happening here between the psychologist and his wife. But at the same time, we could read it as they are running away from the truth. They are running away from the nuance of society and from having an opinion on such a nuanced and complex topic as well. And isn't that what we do? Like the magazine seller, we complain, but when we have to take matters of hand, we just run.
Yeah, just like many people ran away from the conflicts that were being happening in the world. The United States had the easy out of sending in Dr. Manhattan to Vietnam and just, taking over, making it the 51st state of the United States. And the
That's always the one part I never like. Why?
because of total control, but that was running away from the actual problem that caused all that conflict that was there. It's the same way that the psychologist ran away from the problem that he was dealing with.
I think actually, if I recall correctly, that's kind of why they were out is because like his wife's like, "Well, let's take a walk and clear your head of all this," and then that's when he sees the ladies arguing, and he's like, "Well, I got to do something."
It's also the wife's insistence on let's be happy. She can't tolerate anything bad happen. And unfortunately, life is not that. Life has ups and downs, and it's like this woman cannot endure anything that's not happy. And in the same way, she cannot give her support to her partner, to a psychologist, because she doesn't want to be quote unquote touched by that conflict or great morality that happened over there.
It's uncomfortable, and even with the psychologist, I don't think he was prepared for someone like Rorschach. I don't know if he was prepared for someone who is like that broken on the inside.
Since we are talking about characters, I want to move to another character and something that I mentioned a bit earlier at the start, Dr. Manhattan's experience of time. When we have his own chapter, his individual chapter, he makes it very clear that he experiences time non linearly. Like the future, the past, even the present, everything happens at the same time for him. And we see that exponentially closer to the end of the story when he's saying, Laurie, like, I will tell you this in 8 seconds, and in 52 seconds, I will say this other thing. Something that I also found very interesting, which is what I mentioned before, is that the whole story is told non-linearly. Like we have all the stories mixing up, and we have jumping to the past and the present, and we have no hints in the story. Like sometimes I have seen that graphic novels tend to have like the black edges on the panels when we have a flashback or something like that. And in here, there is nothing. We even have other cases of the boy reading the story. We have panels with the story in the book. So in the book within the book, and then the same different events happening in the present, or we just have the narrative of the story and something drawn or a dialogue in the present. So Do you think that this narrative style relates to Dr. Manhattan's perception? Could the story be told from his POV?
I think that's a excellent interpretation.
I've never thought of that before. That's I don't know if that's ever explained because it's like, well, he says he sees time non-linearly, but like, how does he see it? Like, does he see flashes? Does he see the whole thing? Is it all just moving at the same time, kind of like how the story goes?
I interpreted it as everything is happening now at the same time.
Is happening now.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a great interpretation.
And there's also that irony again, he's so powerful. He's ironically enough powerless because he's just kind of like, "Well, what am I gonna do?"
He's gonna go off. Yeah, he's gonna go off to other galaxies and create life. Um, that's what
What
he
am I
said at
gonna
the
do?
end.
I'm just chilling, bro. I just want to go to Mars and make stuff. She's like, I thought you liked humanity again. He was like, well, yeah, I'm gonna go make something. I'm gonna make some more life somewhere else. See how that goes.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And there's a lot of brilliant transitions in here where the dialogue reflects what's going to happen from one last panel on a page into the next page, and how those transitions are just wonderfully done and relate to the story. Like even the lettering in here is significant to the story, especially when you pointed out the pirate story has, of course, a different lettering style.
You mentioned earlier during the meeting, Rorschach, his lettering in the present is always scraggled, but in the flashback, it's clear like a normal.
Yeah, and that's part of it. And I love how even when the panel shows a present picture and we see the pirate lettering, it's still reflecting what's going on presently. The whole pirate story is reflecting what goes on is going on in the even down to a like panel and page level. It's reflecting what's going on presently, and of course a bigger thematic view of the story as well.
I actually came up with this theory because you know what we discussed before, like the stories tries to be very factual in how it presents the characters, never biased, never biasing the reader. It's always like this is their backstory, this is what happened, and we have the visual chapters, and then we have alternations with these types, like newspaper or the extracts from the books and everything. And like I said, it makes an effort of being factual, and Dr. Manhattan is factual. So he actually says that, but so I said like, okay, it could be his recount of everything or simply he observing everything that's happening.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
And something else about Manhattan that I wanted to ask you is that what do you think of his closing line on the conversation with Ozymandias? After Ozymandias does a whole plot and it's revealed and they are left alone, Manhattan kills Rorschach, comes back to speak with Ozymandias, and Ozymandias asks, John, wait, before you leave, I did the right thing, didn't I? It's all worked in the end. And Manhattan answers, in the end, nothing ends, Adrian. Nothing ever ends.
I think that's a direct commentary on the fact that he's seeing this at the same time as he's seeing his beginning. It's not ending for him because he's still seeing all these events playing out all the time. But it also could be a deeper reflection on the fact that Adrian's like, did I do the right thing? And in the end, you still have a whole bunch of ramifications to this. There's a lot of work to be done going forward here. What do you mean by the end? Like Manhattan said, there is no end. Life is still going on, and there's going to be a whole bunch of problems to deal with. And in Manhattan's view, just because what he dealt with is such a minor problem to him because he's a god, basically. So what do you mean by an end? It's not nothing's ending here. You just have something else to do, and there's going to be more problems coming.
Yeah. And I think it can also be read politically. How many times humanity has gone to war and saying, like, this war will end all wars. For example, World War II changed the world order, but we still find ways to war each other. Still have, as we record this podcast, wars going on in the world. Conflict won't end.
Yeah, it's also a good moment for Ozymandias too, because he spent like most of this chapter kind of going like, "Ha ha, my plan worked. You guys can suck it because you can't do anything about it." And then he's like, "Oh man, but did it work?" Which I guess is kind of a karmic comeuppance. Jared, did you watch the Watchmen series? One of the things I really liked is what they did with Ozymandias. He basically like turns into this like crazy mad king, basically. basically. He's just doing all these deranged things just for his Watchmen show was actually pretty good, I think.
I actually liked that he was coherent the whole time. It wasn't something that could be, linked to a mental health problem, but the fact that he was making the choices while conscious about it. He was owning it. That whole chapter is he owning what he said. Yeah, he twists everything to paint a better picture of himself, but still he acknowledges everything he did, you know. It's also interesting linking back to what Jarrell mentioned before, the fact that this is a very structured, the 9 panels structure. We only get like the big panels when we have the scene of what happened in New York, right? We have a 2 pages spread with everything that's happening. That's one of the only moments besides the first or the opening page of every chapter in which we actually have such a spread, almost saying like this is not minor and echoing the importance of the event for the plot. We could say that every other event were small pieces coming into places. This one is a big event that will change everything, which could link back to Manhattan's phrase of nothing ever ends. We just end up putting things in motion only.
And the funny thing is, right after those huge splash pages of horror, you have Manhattan casually reading a newspaper, kind of ignoring everything going on around him, while Laurie's completely in shock, which just totally reflects what we've been saying all along about Manhattan.
Livia, you said he does acknowledge what he did. I don't know if I mean he does say that like, oh, I felt every death I caused. I don't believe that. I don't think he felt remorse.
No, he acknowledges the steps he took or basically why he did it, but yeah, I don't think he owns to the consequences. No, no remorse.
I don't think he felt remorse. Like he says he does, but I'm like, I don't think so.
I think it's also pretty complex what he does. You have to unite humanity against a different evil so that we stop finding evil among each other and fighting each other. But there are consequences to what Ozymandias did, and I don't think he's prepared for that.
I don't think so either. There was one point in the narrative where I think when he was talking to Dan and Rorschach when they first got there, where one of them mentioned that he's the smartest man in the world, and he actually denied that. He said, "No, I'm not." And he goes on to this big explanation why. But that is because he doesn't believe that he saw things correctly before he had that meeting with the comedian, and that changed his perspective. And he also has some doubt about what he did when he asked Manhattan, did I do the right thing in the end? So he didn't believe he was the smartest guy on the planet, but he did believe in his cause. He did believe that what he was doing was for the greater good and that he had to do that in order to stop nuclear war and stuff like that. But that ultimately doesn't make him smart. It just makes him searching for an expedient way to stop what he saw as a problem in the world. And that's not always the best way to tackle problems, as we saw throughout the whole book.
And that's the ending line. I leave it entirely up to you.
Isn't it history entirely up to us, humanity?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. I think in some ways, I actually talked about this with my friend Slay. Well, I think Ozymandias thought it was the only way he could do it.
Going back to that line that you mentioned as well, something that's pretty funny in that place is that we have the 2 guys on the newspaper. Like during the entire book, we have this newspaper putting up scathing news about another newspaper, and they are fighting in that style. And suddenly we have the guy that runs the newspaper just leaving everything to go eat a sandwich. For a moment, he doesn't care about the state of the world. He just wants the sandwich. And that's where it comes. The phrase, I will leave it entirely in your hands. It's perhaps laziness, or perhaps I just want one moment of peace. There are so many ways of reading why he says that phrase. But then the
It's
guy,
also telling the audience that too.
yeah, exactly. Like, do whatever you want, because we go back to the themes of the stories that shape us. Because the guy, the intern, he's going to pick Rorschach's diary, or at least its hint.
You could argue it's actually Rorschach who got the last laugh on Ozymandias. Well, that is if he gets believed, because he sends it to a kind of like right wing rag, which, is always a very reliable source of information.
And I like the ending page that we get the clock at the hour and it's all laid out. perhaps a call to this is the hour in which we actually have to do something, or like a call to action, like you said, Britain, echoing the I will leave it entirely to in your hands, like how you read the story, what you think of this.
It can also symbolize the doomsday clock. The imagery in this book is just fantastic. It's just so many.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we don't know what happens. Because if humanity got united against this extraterrestrial evil that Ozymandias has crafted, and then Rorschach appends that, what's going to happen? Is it going to be the second Manhattan going on, like a Nico of Manhattan living, and we no longer have that
Yeah,
imposed deterrence?
exactly. A lot of open-ended stuff that happens at the end of the story that leaves a lot for the reader to infer and reflect on.
I mean, the only kind of weak part, if I'll just get this out of the way, I'm not really a big fan of Laurie, which I always feel bad for saying that because she's not bad. It's just kind of like you have these like great characters over here, and you have like a pretty good one over there. You know,
To me, she was a case of person trapped in the context. She's powerless all the time. Like she's the epitome of powerlessness because she was defined by her mother. Her mother forced to do things. She never had a bit of decision. Then she got in with John and got dragged to live in the military.
that's probably why she was attracted to John. I That's funny you bring that up because they're both kind of powerless, even though they're have these abilities.
Yeah, but at the same time, she makes it a point that she never had power or that she was also cared for by someone and limited on what she could do. So I think that the opposition, like everybody else, had some choice. She never has a choice. Even when Night Owl tells her, let's go break Rorschach from the prison, she's just like, what? Okay. And doesn't even have a choice, can't stop the matter, nothing. I think she's also the only truly human person. Most of us are powerless to stop some things.
Most like normal ones out of everybody. I mean, Dan has his problems, of course. He's kind of just like I said earlier, he's kind of just a sad sack. But Laurie's kind of the one who's just like, I just want to live in my apartment and like chill out and like have just live my life. Like I don't want anything to do with this superhero crap.
Yeah, it's as I said, to me, it's relatable in the sense of sometimes we just get affected by the circumstances and can't stop them. On that note, and before we wrap up, would you like to remind the readers where they can find you?
Oh, I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Goodreads, and Letterboxd. Just some okie dude, OKIE. That as well. Sorry, yeah, I am on YouTube. I post reviews and discussions and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, you can find me at the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel. I'm also on the Speculative Speculation podcast, as well as film chewing and panel chewing under the page chewing umbrella on pagechewing.com.
Perfect. That said, if you like this episode, please like and subscribe, review the podcast, and let's continue the discussion in the comments. If you want bite sized deep dives, prose analysis, and practical writing advice, please subscribe to my newsletter through Substack at liviajelliot.substack.com. And also, check out my upcoming release, The Omens of War. It is a cosmic horror fantasy and the first book in my series, Records of the Others. And although it has no superheroes, it does have some otherworldly beings and some grey morality. I will leave a link to my book and to subscribe to my newsletter on the description. Thanks for listening and happy reading.